From this emerged the enterprising arm of the Land Trust Alliance, Living Carbon Investments. It's a limited corporation, but it's 100% owned by the nonprofit group of 83 trusts, and they each have set the goals for developing conservation offsets for land trusts using carbon and doing this to the highest standards, so the highest values would be associated with conservation initiatives, and to risk share the development costs for projects, to be an open source educational service to members, and of course there's an enormous invitation to communities and First Nations, and there's a number of projects which involve both that are being reviewed at the moment. Within our corporate group, we've isolated a small group of individuals who've been working on carbon initiative, but we're working on it as an Earth Systems group, seeing carbon as one of the critical factors in the climate Earth system within which we human beings in the interglacial period have maintained the possibility of this civilization, and our well-being rests on this system, but it rests on a number of systems. We all understand the effect of the ozone layer thinning. We're grappling now with the immense effect of the rapid extinction that's happening and reduction in biodiversity from land use change and other factors. There's chemicals, there's a number of systems. The 7 named here of the 9 that the Stockholm Resilience Institute identifies are all bound up in forests. They can be influenced and are key factors in forests. So when we think about projects like the conservation community, we think about them in terms of all of the values and all of the factors. So living carbon as a concept is something that we're differentiating from fossil carbon or dead carbon, and how do we optimize more living carbon? How do we create more living carbon? There's just a large direction for living carbon is to store more, restore more, and protect more. And it's very simple. I've seen 1 or 2 other presentations. Robert and David did a good job talking about how the conservation offsets or carbon credit market works. The tool that's been set up really through the International Panel of Climate Change Scientists. It's a very unique focus that we've had thousands of scientists isolating the key questions, so there can be hard, real, accounted trading that involves real benefits. And so it changes the relationship. And when we think about this in a bigger context, not just between those of us working on renewing and protecting forests and managing forests and those who are in the emission business of burning fuels of one kind or another, it also changes the relationship between the last 250 years, the industrial development of civilization, and the various people who are in rural regions and indigenous people who, in the next 100 years, we have to look at a new picture. And the interesting relationship that developing countries, indigenous people who are present in the landscape and very involved are being looked to solve part of the climate problem created by the industrial era. So there's a major shift. It's been talked about in previous presentations, and perfect opportunity for the Indigenous people or Aboriginal people in Canada and in the rest of the world. We're working with them outside of Canada as well. So the challenge is to get a legally binding carbon agreement, and it's highly synchronous with what has been the last 100 years of working on the within the conservation movement and tying down properties through conservation covenants. So there's a lot of capacity in the conservation community to develop these agreements. There's a lot of precedent. There's a lot of understanding about the challenge of thinking over a long period of time. And when you bring that together with the carbon accounting and that's been developed through the International Panel of Climate Change Scientists, which is most solidly embed in the Clean Development Mechanism, what HERA is calling the one client mechanism. I consider California, however, and British Columbia as having compliant mechanisms as well, just as New Zealand is working. There'll be tradable mechanisms. And there's a lot of accounting work that we do. I won't go into the detail. I'm going to and I'm hoping, I'm watching the chat screen. I'm hoping for questions that go along, but I have 4 sections, and I hope to have room that there's for some exchanges and some questions during this presentation. We have the time for it. So the challenge is to prove that what you've done is different and it's better than business as usual, and that's recognized and validated so you get your full value. And the standards that are pre-compliant or that are regionally structured all come out of all are developed in reference to the international standard and the international effort to deal with what is a global problem. And forest's role is very simply be the more sinks, which is 2 halves of the problem, less emissions and more sinks. And in fact, forests can also reduce emissions. They're a source of emissions, not just in the forest industry burning fossil fuels, but there's fires often in excess of what's healthy for forest ecosystems. Some forest ecosystems are fire biomes, but there are a number of sources of emissions in forests, and forests perform the immensely peak function of removals of greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. So do soil and grassland and wetland ecosystems. So all of them are opportunities, and usually we're doing a bit of both, reducing emissions and increasing removals. And internationally, there's been a dynamic of the industrial countries, which are illustrated here in brown, and the developing countries in green, or the emerging economies in whatever that green is. And so there's questions about who should pay and who should benefit in the same. There's a very parallel debate between rural communities and cities, between Aboriginal peoples and their traditional lands and industrial emitters. And I'm not, even though it would be intriguing to do it, going to talk too much about RED, because I was a technical advisor to PNG in the Cancun negotiations. Hugely, this photo was taken after 52 hours of without sleep for at least the 5 of us up front here, and right after the RED agreement was incorporated into the text and signed off. And the world didn't take much note of the success of the terms of reference for RED, but I feel it's a huge success, and it's simply a leading prototype for protocols that we can initiate in parallel regionally, and I think where to stop is what's important.